Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of The Music Done. I'm, of course, your host, Armando Venditti. Hoping you guys are having a great day, evening, afternoon, whenever you happen to be watching this. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with another segment of Going for the One. We are looking at our favorite debut albums and discussing why, in fact, they are our favorite debut albums. And up next is the one and only Jim Bricker. So please, Jim, take it away.
Hi. Um, so last time I was given the floor here, um, I subjected my fellow panelists and our audience to a little album called The Philosophy of the World.
Not me, you
Um,
didn't, but go ahead.
well,
Fried.
I still think you'll check it out at some point. But anyway, we're gonna kind of move in many degrees of quality here away from the Shags and over to an album that not only was the debut album for this particular band, but could be argued that it is the debut album of an entire genre. And that is In the Court of the King's. Blah. We'll try that again. In the Court of the Crimson King, an observation by King Crimson. That is the full title, once I say it appropriately. And that is released by King Crimson in October of 1969.
Ladies and
Um,
gentlemen, he practiced this, by the way. Go ahead.
no, I didn't. So, real quick, some backstory on Crimson. They, like a phoenix, arose from the ashes of this quirky little band called Giles and Fripp, that made an album in 1968, which went promptly nowhere. Um, the King Crimson then sort of began very quickly and had a very rapid ascendancy. Um, the first rehearsals for the band took place on the 13th of January of 1969. Um, just about 4 months later, they made their live debut at the Speakeasy Club in April of 1969. Fast forward to July, just 3 months later, and they were one of the opening acts in Hyde Park in London for the Rolling Stones. The estimated attendance was between 250,000 and 500,000 people. Um, if I understand correctly, Crimson was the opening act of, I think of about four or five bands, including the Stones, and reports, they may be apocryphal, but reports are that Crimson blew everyone off the stage, and everyone was kind of frightened to even try to follow that up. They recorded their debut album in fits and starts from July and August, and then, as I said, it was released in October. And from the album cover on, just to what you heard from the first seconds all the way to the final, um, it makes a statement. Um, there were other albums that kind of played around with prog, as I understand it, and there were other bands, kind of in the circle of the Nice, the Strawbs. One can make an argument about the prog elements of Days of Future Past by the Moody Blues, which was a couple of years earlier. But most people, when they talk about the origin of prog rock proper, point to this album, in the Court of the Crimson King. Um, 5 tracks, as befits any good prog album. Lots of lengthy things on here. Um, for those who weren't initiated, um, or just took their first listen of the album, I'm sure they got knocked on their ass. And yes, I said ass, Armando,
Yes, you
um,
did.
because of this very
Yes, you did.
quiet sort of flute wind mellotron thing that kind of starts off the album for like the first half a minute, and then it just blows, and I mean absolutely blows into
Yeah,
21st Century Schizoid Man.
yeah, yeah.
And you kind of knew at that point. It's like, uh-oh, this is not granny music. This is not necessarily the stoner, psychedelic rock that I was listening to last year. This is something entirely new and in your face and inescapable. And Schizoid Man is one of those tunes that is still sort of like a head shaker today, just because of those amazing multi-note runs that are happening in the bridge, kind of getting in and out of the solo section. It's a train wreck waiting to happen for those who don't have the fingering to to make that happen. Um, it's just an all-out classic. You go to the second track called "I Talk to the Wind," and it's like the polar opposite in tone. Whereas Schizoid Man is just like almost this audio horror movie. I Talk to the Wind is this completely placid with a
Pastoral.
P, yeah, pastoral piece, and
I
it's
understood
just
what you
really
said.
gentle. I know, but we've had this argument before, young man, so I wanted to just re-emphasize my point. Um,
Go ahead.
Emphasis. So yeah, I Talk to the Wind again. Lots of actual flute and mellotron flute happening here. Some beautiful electric guitar that is kind of in a Wes Montgomery or Grant Green sort of mode. Not that typical Fripp tone, which shows that he does have a lot of breadth and availability to him. Um, the side concludes with Epitaph, which is another sort of monumental tune that is just
Dripping the Mellotron.
dripping with Mellotron. Absolutely. I think between Fripp and Ian Wallace, or not Ian Wallace, Ian McDonald, they're both playing Mellotron at simultaneously on a lot of the parts of this track, and it's just absolutely powerful. It's an unbelievable way to end the album. When I played this for my son, he thought the lyrics to Epitaph were a little bit kind of you know hippy dippy poetry, but I still think it works pretty well.
I think it's still relevant today. I think it's bang on lyrically.
Yeah,
Like, oh
How
my
yeah.
old
God.
was he when you played it for him?
Whiny.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, but yeah, it's still poignant and it's still relevant today, those lyrics. Yeah. Yeah.
hmm
Hmm.
Um, may have been younger than 20, but not by too much. Okay, so that's all side one, three tracks. You flip this beast over and you get to Moonchild. Moonchild is a an exercise in patience, because it's basically one proper tune that they kind of pasted a 9 to 8 minute improvisation on the tail end of it,
Okay.
and that improv, which is just basically drums, mellotron, and guitar, um, can wear on the patience of a listener, just because it seems to be going nowhere. And Ken, you've talked about noodling before on this episode, and yes, the improv section of Moonchild is just awash with noodling. Um, there are a few fun moments in there where they're actually locking on to some melodic idea and carrying it forward. There's even a little nod to Surrey with the Fringe on Top in there if you've got ears to hear it. So that's pretty fun. But again, it's one of these things where it's like 12 minutes of what the heck was that? And then you get to the final track of the album, which is "The Chord of the Crimson King," which again starts off with more mellotron than should be allowed any song, and
Wall
it's
to wall.
just this wall to wall mellotron. It's just this fever dream of this sort of Dante's Inferno like descent into the court of the Crimson King. Um, However, it kind of reestablishes the authority that was begun on side one, and again, it totally just ends the album on a banger. Another kind of a head fake too of an end as well, because you think the song's over, but it's like, nope, there's just a little bit more there that you have to make sure that you don't turn it off ahead of time so you get the full effect. Um,
Yeah.
this album. So, of the three albums that I've presented to our August panel and our lovely audience thus far, this by far is the strongest. I mean, Chicago Transit Authority, you know, had some really good stuff. It was about like an 8.5. Um, Philosophy of the World by the Shags, it's a 10 on the awful scale, but on any sort of normal scale, it's kind of like a zero. Um,
Kind of like a
but this
zero.
one, kind of like, yeah, exactly. It's less than zero. Thank you, Elvis Costello.
Yes.
But now we are, clearly in, high quality territory. The King Crimson debut is like a solid 9.5 overall on the tunes. Tracks one, two, three, and five, I give them 10 out of tens. Moonchild is like a seven because, I do like the song portion of it, and I do like I'll just say the audacity of doing this sort of, 8 to 9 minute improv tag at the end of it. Again, if you're not in the mood to hear that, you can like, yeah, all right, let's skip it and go to the next song. But overall, I give that tune a seven. So that's what sort of brings the ranking down from like a perfect 10. Um, but yeah, this is just an unbelievable record, and I think sort of set the world on notice. It's like, okay, there's a new there's a new bar that's been set,
Yeah.
and whether you're Yes or Genesis or whatever band that was beginning around that time, if you heard Crimson, you're like, oh crap, how do we compete with that? And
Okay.
the good
Yeah.
news is that Crimson kind of, imploded and self-destructed in a lot of ways, in 1969 at the end of their tour in December. So a lot of these bands probably went, phew, we don't have to deal with that.
Yeah.
And they were pretty much like a studio band until autumn of 71. And then they started touring again off of, a couple of very strange albums, Lizard and then Islands. Um,
Actually,
they're great.
Islands is my favorite album.
Oh, of Crimson?
Yeah. I think they were at Mach number 72 at that point, when in terms of
I
the
think
lineup
so.
change. So yeah.
I think you're right. There's
But
there is a lot of there is a lot of wonderful stuff about Islands. Specifically Sailor's Tale and that title track are
yeah.
just, absolutely amazing. But yeah, I'm sure that everyone else has heard In the Court at least once. So what do you all think? Am I on track? Am I off base? Talk to me, buds.
You're on track. Just quickly, when I first heard it a few years ago, I was like, especially the lead off track, it's like 20 and 21st century schizoid. I was like, no, I can't. I can't. It's just too much sonically, the wall of guitar and horns coming at me, and it's just like I'm like sensory overload kind of a thing at that point. But
Hmm.
the more I listened to it, I understood it and I got into it. Yeah. So, and
Hmm.
that's surprisingly, I started buying the CDs, and the box sets actually. But no, no,
This is my shocked face.
yeah, I know. No, it's true. Um, and this is my constipation face, but no, it's true. It's a good album. It's a good album. Um, just my last question is, and then we'll let Sagosh speak. Uh, would this be a gateway that you would recommend to someone, or would you recommend any of the other albums like Starless and Bubba Black? Or
Well, I think it really depends on whom I'm giving the recommendation. If there's someone who's like deep into, like metal and, 60s music, I would probably recommend this one. If someone was probably more familiar with maybe more angular stuff, which with maybe a tad twinge of a pop edge to it, I'd probably recommend Discipline. Um, if there's someone who's just like John Zorn is my absolute favorite, I'd probably recommend Lark's Tongues and Aspic. I mean, there's so many different
Gateways.
uh, faces of Crimson that it's very easy to kind of tailor a recommendation to someone based on, sort of what their musical lane is. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. Okay. Ken, Sagosh, any
Oh,
comments?
Sagosh.
Sagosh.
I have surprisingly not heard this album as much as I should have. I've definitely heard it a few times, and I do recall offhand Schizoid Man, I Talk to the Wind, and the title track especially. Those are all terrific. In fact, I remember thinking at the time that both I Talk to the Wind and the title track, maybe due to the excess of mellotrons and there's a sweetness in Greg Lake's voice. And I remember thinking at that time, this is very moody blues.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So those were very accessible to me. And Schizoid Man, while it was obviously a little over the top, it was interesting. It kept you there, as a lot of Crimson does. I mean, even in the later years, which I kind of have developed a greater liking for. My favorite period is the Blue period, actually. And that's
Hmm.
surprising because they do actually go way over the top in that area. But there's something about the way in which King Crimson approaches the eccentric stuff.
Okay.
There's a taste to it. There is a sound to it that's very captivating. And I think the
Hmm.
same holds.
Captivating. Okay.
It's not accessible in the conventional sense, but it makes you stop and listen.
It's commanding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I get that.
Just a point on that, since you brought up the comparison, Sagosh. When Crimson first went into the studio to record their debut album, the record label had hired the producer of the Moody Blues to be the producer of, the first Crimson album.
That's right.
And
Oh,
within like the first week, they just said, no, this ain't working at all. The producer just did not get the vibe of what uh, Fripp and Lake and the boys were going for. So.
Yeah, I can see that.
And so Fripp said, "We'll do it ourselves," and they produced it themselves. And holy crap, we got what we got.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. No, I get that. I get that.
Ken, I know your history with Crimson is checkered.
I've always associated this more with 60s psych than prog. I'm a
Okay.
big fan. I'm a big fan of 60s psychedelia.
I do believe
Uh,
that's one of the tags of in terms
yeah,
of the
yeah,
genre
yeah.
description. Yeah, yeah. I
And
get that.
so that's how I discovered this album. Um, it's the Crimson album I've listened to most. Um, I
Okay.
haven't listened to them. I haven't listened to them all, but at least at this point in time, it is my favorite. And part of that might just be because of my history with it. But yeah, another cracker from 1969 for sure.
Okay. Fair
I don't
enough.
even mind the noodling in that one song.
Okay. Okay. All
Who
right,
are you,
ladies.
and what have you done with Ken?
I'm just picky about my noodling.
Okay.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Another segment of Going for the One featuring King Crimson and the Court of the Crimson King. I was able to say it there, Jim. There you go. And so please,
Kingsley
ladies,
Unlike
Crimson.
me.
yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, please put down in the comments below your opinion of this album or any debut album that you feel is your favorite and why is it your favorite. I want to thank Sagosh, Ken, and Jim for coming along with me on this journey. I'm having a hell of a time. I think this is a great series. I think this is sparking great conversation among the four of us. And we do hope that you are enjoying this because we are enjoying bringing this to you. So, again, please click like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to keep yourselves on top of any new content we got coming up. We've got a lot more to come on Going for the One, and we will be right back with another episode. Surprisingly enough, of Going for the One.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good day. Look after yourselves, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.